Hi, everybody. I hope you're all safe and healthy wherever you are and comfortable. So, today we're going to talk about steak. Lucky me, I found some steak at the store, which was nice because I knew I was going to do this lecture. So, we're going to talk about steak today and carrying off of the themes that we started last time with eggs. Think about proteins and the temperatures that they unravel at and the different tasks we need to perform while cooking. So, let's have at it. Okay. So first I want to bring us back to proteins and thinking about time and temperature and how that all works together. Like we discussed last time, there are specific temperatures that specific proteins need to unravel. And those that unraveling event, unfolding and aggregation is eventually what leads our food to have the texture that it does, our protein heavy foods to have the texture that it does. So in this diagram, I've kind of shown that. On the right hand side are three different scenarios. In the first scenario, we have an example where we don't give the protein enough temperature to unfold. This is a really low temperature, and so no matter how long you hold that protein at that low temperature, it's not going to unfold. But once we give it enough temperature, like I have in the middle there, then the protein will unfold. And the more temperature I give it, the more energy I give it, the faster the protein will unfold. Now, when we are going on to thinking about how we're cooking our steak and how we're cooking other types of meat, there are a couple of chemical tasks that we need to do. We need to unfold the proteins that we need to unfold to get the texture the way we need it, but we also want to do the Maillard reaction. And this is really critical. And the trick in cooking steak and in cooking many other protein heavy foods is that the proteins finish unfolding at the same time that the Maillard reaction or our browning reactions finish as well. And so that's something we need to think about and make a strategy for as we're cooking our meat. So, like we do every time, we're going to take a little closer look at what's going on in our food as we cook it, what our food molecules look like. And so here is a picture of the muscular system of a cow, right? And so we kind of have an idea of what muscles look like. There are striations and other things that go on. But as we zoom in to the muscle tissue itself, we see muscle fibers, right? And each muscle fiber is separated by little layers of water. And if we zoom in a little bit more, we see our system of proteins that are responsible for moving, our system of proteins that are needed, that are responsible for the textures in our food as well when we cook protein heavy foods or our meats. So I want to take a quick look at an image of some steaks cooked at different temperatures. This image is from Kenji Lopez Alt in his blog on Serious Eats the Food Lab. This is a great resource for learning lots about food chemistry and food science. Kenji does wonderful work. I have the link for it listed here. This particular post was about using a reverse sear method to make steak, and so I'm going to talk about that later. But this is great. But one thing that we notice is that we get different textures in our meat and different colors in our meat too, depending on what internal temperature we cook that meat to. So for rare, we're at 120 degrees. Medium, we're up to 140, and well done, we're up to 160. All of those correspond to different changes in our proteins and what goes on as we cook them, right? So as we increase the temperature, just like we saw in the eggs, as we keep increasing the temperature, there are different proteins that will unfold that will then change the texture, right? Which will increase or make changes in the texture as we continue to unfold and aggregate different proteins. So let's have a look at what proteins are actually there. Our two primary components of our muscle system in terms of proteins are actin and myosin. And perhaps you've learned about this, you remember it from high school biology, or you've learned a little bit of anatomy on the way. But actin and myosin are the two most important proteins for how we move. And so when we're flexing our muscles, when we're moving, The myosin, which is on the bottom there, uses those two little arms to grab onto the actin and pull it, and that's what happens as we're moving. That's the mechanism for how our muscles move. And so these are the proteins too that are important as we cook it. All right, so we can learn a little bit about these proteins as well. And I've listed here a research paper where some scientists have looked specifically at what happens, the temperatures at which these proteins unfold. And these are for rabbit muscles instead of bovine muscles. But this is a good example. I like this example because it is open access. You can look it up online, and anyone can read it and get some information. For my students in my class at AU, we are going to be doing more and more looking at primary sources for studying how changes in protein texture and other chemical changes in our food, how that all works. So I would like for my students specifically to start thinking about going after primary sources and using them to better understand our food chemistry. Okay, so this paper details the temperatures at which these proteins unfold. And we talked about that a little bit with eggs, right? The different temperatures our egg proteins unfold at. So I want to look at that here. Okay, so again, here's actin and myosin. If we start off at 100 degrees Fahrenheit, all of those proteins are still in the shapes that they're going to take normally. We can increase that temperature to 110, and there are no changes. Once we get to 120, the arm parts of myosin, those upper parts, are going to unravel. So at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, those arm portions of myosin will unfold. As we increase the temperature to 130, still not much more goes on. All right, that temperature is low enough. It is not high enough to unfold the body portion of myosin or actin. Okay, so our temperature is still low enough. As we increase the temperature again to 136, then the body portion of myosin unfolds. So at 136, we have completely unraveled myosin, both the main portion and its little arms that are coming off. But actin still doesn't unfold. All right, going up in temperature again to 140, actin is still stable. But once we get to 150 degrees, then actin unfolds. So at 150 degrees, we've given enough energy to unfold all of these proteins. Now, I really want to stress that at those lower temperatures, as if we keep the temperature low enough, right, if we keep the temperature low enough, some of those proteins will not unfold. To unfold a protein, you have to give it enough energy. Okay, and so how does this correspond to cooking steak? Well, if we're going to look at these pictures right next to one another, right? So the picture from Kenji's post and my diagram of our muscle proteins, you can see that for a piece of meat, a piece of steak that's cooked rare, we have only unfolded the arms of myosin, right? Those arms that stick up. If we cook a steak to medium, we've unfolded both the arms and the body of myosin. And if we cook a steak to well done, we have unfolded all of actin and myosin. Everything has unfolded. And so those individual unfolding events are what dictate the textures we get for rare, medium, and well done steaks. Okay, like I said before, cooking our meat there are two processes that are really important. We need to unfold the proteins that we want to unfold, but we also need to do the Maillard reaction. That Maillard reaction is a place where lots of flavor is going to come out. And so we need to do both. Okay, if we cook our steak over a pan and do it over low heat, it's going to take a long time for that energy to get to the middle of our steak. And so we are going to have our steak be well done on the outside, and then the temperature that we want in the very middle. And with the low temperature, we get very little of the Maillard reaction too. Now, if we want to increase the temperature of our pan, if if we increase the temperature of our pan, we're going to sear the outside really quickly. We're going to get that browning from the Maillard reaction really quickly. But the inside of our steak is going to be raw. And so we can't use a really hot temperature to do this either. Okay, and so one strategy for doing this, for approaching how we cook our steak, is to do this in 2 steps, to cook our steak in 2 steps. In the first step, we are going to cook our steak over really low temperature for a long time to get the internal temperature just right. So super low, really, really low for a long time. You can do this on a grill, and that's how I'm going to show you how I did mine in a minute. Or you can do it in an oven at like 250 degrees. Okay, so you cook your steak until your internal temperature is just about right. When I do mine, I cook it until the internal temperature is about 10 degrees lower than I want it to be. And then after that is over, I quickly sear it on the outside to get that nice browning reaction. Okay. The other thing that I want to stress here too is that full generation of flavor is really important for lots of cooking. For the steak that I've done here, for any cooking really, right? Whenever you're making any dish, you want to properly season your food with salt. So I season mine. We're going to show this process in just a minute. And then you want to hit all the notes, right? Any dish that is pleasing to us is going to have some base notes, some middle notes, and some top notes. For when I serve this steak, I have the base notes that we have are the steak and the Maillard reaction. I use the butter and maybe some garlic as a middle note, and the top notes are some fresh herbs. And we're going to have a whole class where we talk about flavor matching and flavor pairing and flavor combinations later. But I just wanted to highlight that now. So let's get through this process and talk about what goes on. The first thing that I did is I seasoned my steak with salt, and I seasoned both sides, and I stored that overnight, right? So I want to give my meat a long time to soak up that salt. And we'll talk about that in another lecture coming up soon. Okay, the next thing I did is that I prepped a grill. So I like to cook these on the grill. Like I said, you can do it in your oven at about 250. But what I did is I cook it in my little Weber grill. I heat up some charcoal, and I layer all of that charcoal to one side. And then I place the steak on the opposite side of the grill, and I close it up. All right, this gives an indirect way to cook my steak. I'm going to have my steak opposite of the charcoal, and so I can cook it really slowly. And like I said, I'm going to cook it slowly until the temperature is about 10 degrees lower than what I want it at the end. Okay, for my second step here, I can sear and get that nice Maillard reaction, that nice browning on the outside of my steak. And I have 2 options for this. One, I can use my charcoal again, and here I have an example of how I do this, right? I get my chimney going, and when it's ready, I put my grill grate on top of the chimney, and I can cook the steak right on top of the chimney. This gets super hot. It's a great way to sear any meats that you're cooking. But how I'm going to do that for this video and for the steak that I've made today is I'm going to do it in a mixture of butter and oil. And you get it nice and piping hot, and the browned butter that you're getting is going to add lots of nice flavor. And you just sear that really quickly. This one I cook for about a minute on each side just to get the browning that I want to get. And so in the end, I coat it with a little butter to get my final flavor, and we have a great tasting steak and a wonderful meal. So again, right, I want to reiterate, to cook our steak, we're doing 2 processes. And so we're going to separate those into 2 different steps. I'm going to cook my steak really slowly so that I get the internal temperature that I want. And then I'm going to sear it really quickly to get the browning that I want on the outside. All right. Thanks again for listening. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts, you want to know some more, all of my info is here on this credit screen. So thanks again. Hope everyone is doing well.